Hello everyone. In this video, we will talk about the custom API. In this video, we will see a little bit theory of the custom API and one demo with example. So let's proceed. So what is custom API? So custom API is the extended concept of the custom actions which provides the developer with the different capabilities, but there are some capabilities which are limited, and for that we used to write the code. So in the actions workflow, we used to create the code activities and we used to register as a steps and perform those operations. So we know that those options were not achievable, so we are going for the code approach, but that will be registered as a steps. Also, action used to configure as a message. So when we try to create our own kind of message in the dynamics, we used to create the actions, and that actions used to be available to call it through the plugin or through the interface or the from the external source with the authenticated way. So to extend that versions of the capability of the custom actions, the concept of the custom API has been created. So here the custom API and the workflow actions, there are some core capability differences. There are a lot of it, but we will go through a few of it, which is the important one before we use the custom API and we design it in our project and to try to make the decision why we need it. So some of the core capabilities I will be talking here in this video. There will be more, you can let me know in the comment box. So first, the concept of this workflow actions and the custom API is about the declarative logic, because in the workflow actions we can configure the steps as a user interface, but the custom API we always have to create the plugin. We have to literally structure the plugin, sign in, register that assembly into the dynamics and use that assembly as a steps in the custom API. But in the case of workflow actions, we do not need, because we can configure most of the operations through the steps only. Again, require a specific privilege. When we create the action create a message in the tool, and that message will be available to anybody who knows it, and they can call it if they know the structure to call it. So there is no privilege required for that actions to be restricted to call it, but the custom API is building with the privilege label, so we can set the privilege, and that when privilege is applicable to the user, then they can call it. So it gets more secure in the custom API, not in the workflow actions. Then is make message private. So we know that as soon as the workflow action is created, it creates the message, so that message will be automatically published to the metadata and it will be available to everybody to use it. But the custom API has the same feature, but it we can also make this as a private. So sometimes we develop the our own message and do not want to share with the different users and do not want to make this available for the another users to call it. So in this case, we can make this our own private message and we can configure through the custom API as options there. We'll see that example when we see talk about these private. Then we are having create OData function. So we know that metadata was suppose the OData web services, and OData has the two types of operations in the dynamics. One is the action, another is the function. So actions are used when we do some transactions into the database, and the functions are used when we want to retrieve it. So here the workflow actions only supports the action kind of logic and function does not support. But in the custom API, we can configure it. So we are having one a field there. We can configure whether this API which we are creating, we want to mark it as a function or not. So this is more extended version of the workflow actions. We can configure the API as a function or we can configure API as a actions. So we can do that. Also, there is a subject to 2 minute limit. We can, and this is the point we always look for whenever we try to create any custom code. So we know that when we create the workflow actions, if we are trying to achieve the business logic, and if it is achievable through the steps what we have the options there, if then the 2 minutes logics will not be applicable, because if the workflow is running in the asynchronous in the background, then the 2 minutes logic will not be applicable at that point if it is only configured through the stepwise. But whenever we go for the code level, then we consider it. So any plugin, any code activity what we write, we have to consider the 2 minutes 120 minutes limits, sorry, 120-second limits in the executions of the code. So since we, as we have seen it, that custom API always uses the plugin, so whenever there is a plugin, then 120-second limit, time limit, we have to consider it. So this is the not case always applicable for the workflow action, but for the custom app API it always will be there. So these are the few points which we I wanted to discuss about the custom API, and we have to consider it before we take the decision of creating the custom API. So example is when we can use it. So we can use whenever we have to make the interface call, inbound call to the dynamics. So those kind of features when we want to implement, we can use the custom API. So before I go for the other details in the example, I will try to create the custom API in the Dynamics, and we'll see the forms. These options will be there, and what are these options means to when we try to create it. Okay. So here I have logged into my Dynamics. Okay, and here I have opened the advanced find. So in the advanced find you can look for the custom API, and you can list it. So you will see all custom API created for your system, but out of the box automatically some of the custom API will be already available. So you can create a new custom API from here. When you create, so there's different way to create it. One way is to create through the dynamics form, another way is to create through the plugin registration tool. So I can show you both way. So I'll have log into the plugin registration tool here. Okay, then you can go to the view, and you can sort the by message or by assembly. So when you want to see um, your custom API, you can see by message. Otherwise, if you want to create the new one, you can go to the here register and create a new custom API. So when you create, this is this interface, it will be coming through the plugin registration tool, and this interface will be coming through the dynamics form, but both are similar in the background when we create it. So talk about the dynamics form, and we'll see the what is the purpose of these individual fields, what is this means to. Okay, so here the unique names. So when we try to create the any custom API, we have to give the unique name. So when you provide the unique names, we have to make sure the prefix of the solution is always selected. So we know that some of the solution will have the publisher, and publisher will have the prefixes, right? So that prefix we must have to include in our unique name, and then you can describe it. So in this case example, I'm going to take the simple example as creating the new account with the minimum details. Okay, so in this case I can specify my prefix of the solution. The solution which I have created for myself is the DNLB customization, and the prefix of this one is DNLB underscore. So for that one I have to create define the prefix DNLB underscore. If you do not provide the prefix in the unique name, then you will not be able to create it. I can show you that will give the system admin error. So example, I'm giving some account name, okay, and try to give some details. Okay. Okay, so you can see I have not given the unique name, and try to create it, you will get the error because it expects this to be available under some particular solution. So that is why this error will be coming. So we have to make sure this custom API what you created, it belongs to one of the solution. And that is why when you try to create this custom API through the plugin registration tool, you will see it will ask you to select the solution first. So when you select the solution, then automatically the prefix of that solution will be added here, and then you can give the unique name. So that is why the purpose of the Unix sorry prefix is there in the dynamic 365 form way when you're going to create it.
it. So make sure that is the error you are going it. Okay. Then you can define the name. This name will be there on the, it will display when you try to search the your custom API. Then this is the display name and the description. What is the purpose of this custom API? You can describe here. Now the important points start from here, the binding type. So here we are having three different type of binding: the global, entity, and then collect entity collections. So we know that these options are similar to when we create the uh, workflow actions. So in this solution here, if we go to the process and try to create the new um, workflow from here, you will see the options are similar to the entity when we select there. So there was options to create the global and particular entity wise. So this is similar to that. Let me reload this. Okay, I'll close this solution again. This is my advanced. Go to solutions.
Okay, this is my solution. So I was saying,
When the new actions, we have the type, right? We can select. So we there we the global and have the entity wise. So see the bind tab also have the global or the entity, and here we have one more option in the custom API which is called the entity collection. So here this means the when we have mentioned the global, then this will be not selected to any entity type, and it will be kind of unbound option, unbound action. So in the dataverse we are having two type of actions executions, right? One is the unbound, another is the bound. So when it is global, this is not specific to any entity, and this is unbound kind of actions or logic. And when it is a particular entity, then it is bounded kind of actions, and in this case we must have to provide the ID of that bounded type of entity record so that the operations will be executed. So here, when you see selecting the global, then this is your unbound API. When you selection as entity, then it is bounded API, and when it is entity select collection, this is also kind of bounded API. So that is why when you create here in the API record, so we have to specify what type of operations I want to. So you can select the global entity, and then the based on your requirement or what you're going to achieve it through the custom API, you can select it. You can mark that one. Then there is if you select the type as entity, then you know that we have to select the type of we have to provide the schema name of that entity where we are trying to bind it. So when you making as entity as a binding type as entity, then this we have to specify. And when you try to execute this API, then as a query parameter we have to pass the entity ID, schema ID, with the schema name and the ID of that record to validate it, to run this API against that particular entity. It is like that. So the next option is the is function. So as we have discussed before, that the API can be marked as a function or the action. So if it is function is pointed as no, then this means this is behaving as actions, and the actions can be called through the post operations, post messages. If it is function, then function will be called to the get messages. So
if we know that what type of actions I'm going to use. So example, this API will take my some body input parameter and then I want to process it. So in this case, we always have to mark this is function as no, because we have to use as a post call or put call or something like that, so that the request message will be coming as a body parameter and I will using it. So in this case, we always have to mark is function as no. If we do not have the input body parameter to be coming and we just want to list the results to the requester who is trying to call it, that time we have to mark this function as yes. And this when it is this is yes, if this function is all yes, then this means we it will only support the message get operation. Okay, so here as we have seen theory, so when it is function yes, then it is only support the gates. If it is no, then we can mark as a post call and we can have the parameters coming from body to do the transactions further, any operations we want to perform. So next thing
is the is private. So we have seen it that the actions, workflow actions cannot be marked as private, but the APIs can be marked as private. So when we mark this is private, then this API will not be available under the metadata. No, they cannot be seen by the other developers. The developers who is owning it, basically the publisher or the solution publisher who is owning it, they will have the capability to change it, modify it whenever it is required. And then other developers, they can consume it, they can use it if they know how to use it, if they know the message name and they know the parameter or the payload details, they can call it, they can use it. But they cannot change the operation logic. It will be changeable only by the publisher who is owning it, when this is marked as no, sorry, when this is marked as yes. The next is allow process. I will go to this point in the last, then the before that I'm going to the next point, that is allow custom processing steps. So again, here also we are having three different type of option. One is none, another is asynchronous, another sync and async. So when it is selected as none, so we know that when we have the plugin type here selected, so every plugin, every custom API should be associated to the plugin message, and that is the plugin message will be handling the request and it will processing it. So when we are specify as none, so none, then the plugin message type what we have selected here, it will be always applicable to that, and the other developers will not be able to change it, the logic or operations of that one. So if you want that this API should always will be executing with my particular operation, particular way, and I do not want any other developer to change it in the future, so in this case we have to mark this as a none. Okay, then the next option is async only. So when you select this option, when we have requirement that the developers or the developers who is calling my API, we can allow them to see it that your API call been happened, but we cannot allow them to control like canceling the or job or the changing the operational logic, the plugin and all. If you do not want them to change it, then this operation will be used. So basically, you when you want some other developers to see that this call has been happened, and they can see it, the request and response on that, and they can detect if that call triggered. But we they cannot update, they cannot develop anything, they cannot change the operational logic. That cannot be allowed when we are selecting as async only. When we select the sync and async, then which means the other developers can contribute in the development, or we can support the other changes when it is coming from other developers, and they can have the full controls as the almost full controls as the publisher who is developing it. So they can allow we can allow them to detect it, we can allow them to cancel this API, and we can allow them to change the operational logic. And also, if you want other developers also to contribute in your development, and we can support their changes what they are making, then we can select this of type as sync as sync. Coming to the next point, this one, enable for workflow. uh, for this point we are having this um, some
we know that the workflow actions, when we configure, we can call this action through the steps of the another workflow. So basically the actions or the workflow, when we like child workflow, when we create, we can run this inside the steps. So same concept is also applicable to the API. So the custom API also we can consume through the steps, but there's limitations. There are some configuration limitations we have to make sure that are validating. Then only those custom APIs can only be called through the steps. So some point is that um, when you want to call your API through the designer steps, then you have to make sure the is function is always false. So as we have seen that this this is function what we are having here, if it is no, then only we can call this we can call this API through the steps. If it is yes, then we cannot call it. And why we cannot call it? If you say making as yes, then we know that this is the get call, and when we do the get call, basically we use to list the records. So in the steps, if we get the list of records, how to handle it, how to loop it, those controls are not there. So that is why the function type of API will not supporting my plugin registration tool, and I can see my web API name here, the custom API which I have created, the account name, it is coming here. So I will be showing you how to use this custom API with one demo. So in the demo, I'll show you how to call this API and create the account record by taking the name as an input parameter and then create the account record using that. So the API is pretty simple, but you will get it how to use it. So before proceed further, we have to configure the parameters. And as we have seen it that when we are using the any API, when we create, we need to have some input parameter, and then it will return something as a message. So we have the response parameters, so those we need to configure it. But these things we cannot configure using the dynamics interface, because in the dynamics interface we will not get the create button available through the associate view of this particular API. So if you can see from the request parameter, we do not have create button here. So we need to configure this response and request parameters through the plugin registration tool. So that is why when we develop the custom API, we may need to use the different combination of the like approach, like the plugin registration tool and then the Dynamics interface to uh, create those kind of things which is available at that point for for those components. So here, the when we configure to the plugin registration tool, here when you double click on this my API, I can see I have the two box, one for the request parameter, another for the response parameter, and other details as we have seen it, we have configured. There's currently assembly field is not selected because we will create the plugin for that. Okay, remaining thing is as selected and we cannot change it. You can see the binding type, once it is selected we cannot change. The custom processing step we cannot change. However, the only the private part is private thing is something which we can mark this as a private yes or no, and also the function we cannot change. So the we can mark this private yes whenever, like when we are making it in the development environment, we can keep this as a no private, but when we release to the production and all, we want our API not to be exposed by third party users, so the third party and other publishers. So that is why that time we'll mark this as a private yes. So only this parameter is changeable, other parameters will be locked, and assembly will be changeable. So those configurations we have to be very carefully chosen when we are creating the custom API. So moving next, I'm going to add the one request parameter. So I'll add this name as a name, as I'll take the name as a name of the input account name. So name like something like that, name underscore account. Okay. So this name will be displayed automatically, and the type of this one is as we can see, And these are the different types which custom APIs support. And we know that when we are seeing about the allowing the custom API through the workflows, that time we saw the entity collections, entity, and the string array. These are the another additional types of the data of which custom APIs allow us to select. But when you use these types of the input parameter or response parameter, that time we cannot use this API as a steps of the another workflow. So here I can select this type as a string, okay, and then this is the name, and there is one checkbox if you want to mark that particular field as optional or required. If you are checking this as a is optional, then this field, if you not pass the data for that field, that will also work. But currently we need this account name as a mandatory, so that is why I will not check it. So we can add it. And also we know that all the APIs should must return something to the users, so we have to must include at least that is the best practice is that too we should have always one response parameter configured to the API. So here I will just mark this as a API response. Okay, then this it uh, then I have the this type will be I will taking as a string type because I want to return the string value. Okay, so that is it. And let me change this name. I'll just name this as a account name. Okay, and then I will take the another type also, account name. I will take the another input parameter also as a lookup, because when I see in the dynamics I will have the another lookup value of the same account. So if you open this account record, and we are having the lookup of itself on the account, that's called a parent account ID, this one. So I will set this account ID also in the API. So for this one I will take the another parameter here, that is called the parent account ID. Okay, and I will set this as a type also string because I want to pass the GUID of that input as a string here, and this is also non-optional. Okay, and add it. So only two input parameter, account name and parent account ID, and then output we are having the API response. So three response parameter, sorry, one response parameter and two request parameter we have configured, and we can update this. Once it is updated, and if we refresh the record in the dynamics, then we can see these records configured there. So it is updated. I'll go to the dynamics and I will refresh this record. You can see the request parameter is displaying here, and if you see the response parameter, we'll have one response parameter configured here. So it is configured. Now we have to create the plugin. So I have already created a plugin sample one. I may need to modify a little bit. So we can create the class library project, and the structure of the plugin is similar to that and the normal plugins when we develop for the normal, like for the different SDK messages for the different pipelines, pre-operation, pre-validation, and post-operation. So they are same way. We have to create the class library project, one class file, and we have to include the references, that is the XLM SDK, Microsoft XLM.SDK, this one, and I have referred to my this one using this one, and then I have implemented the iPlugin interface here. As soon as we implement, the execute method will be given, and then through that execute method we have to extract the CRM service, and before that we have the context, and then service provider, sorry, service factory from the service provider. So once service factory is there, then we can create the organization service. So this structure is similar to the other plugins, and there's a different way how to call it. If there's some validations, we maintain it, but here I have written this in a straightforward, so this logic will be known to most of the developers who is writing the plugin. So this part is pretty say, common for almost all the plugin. Now When we this plugin gets executed and it is registered as a part of the custom API, then how we can read the message which is passed through that my custom API. So those messages will be coming through the part of the input parameter. So under the context we have the one object that is called the input parameter. So from here the collections of these input parameters we can retrieve our input parameters one by one. So here I have specified the account name as input parameter. So this is the same name what we have configured. Let me open it again. I'll recheck it. So this is my account name. I can copy the name of this field, account name. I can pass here. So the input parameter which is coming through this value, I want to read it, and this is the part of a string. That is, I'll take this as a string variable. Likewise, if you have taken the another different type of input parameter like date time, the entity, then option set, some integer, float, then you have to convert that your particular input type into the particular data format and then use it for your operation. And then next is the parent account ID. This one, I'll copy this name also, put here because I want to read these two here. And once I will have the value coming from the input parameter I have into my here, then I can check it. Like if you have some checks to be applied, you can check it, some null checks and all, you can add it, but I'm not going to that label as of now. Just wanted to show you with some example. So here I'm going to create the record of the new account entity. So that is why I have taken the new account create account variable here, and I'm going to set the name value, which is name coming from my input parameter. And then there's a lookup value, the parent account ID. I'm going to set the new entity reference of the same entity account with the GUID which is I'm receiving through the input parameter here. And once it is set, then I will use the CRM service create operation to create the record. Once the record is created, it will return me the GUID of that record, and this GUID record I'm going to set into the API response. So this is my response parameter, this one. So in the response parameter I will set it the message. If you want to set anything particular, so we can set. This is very important one. So suppose example, if you're writing the get for a plugin, creating the API which is having the response, only response and no operations and transactions. So like example, the function type like is function equal to yes, which supports only get. So you can create the plugin like this one and retrieve your records based on the conditions and set those records as entity collections into your response. It will display there. So you can do this one. So always in the response you set your values what you want to display to the users who is calling it. So once this is done, so this is completed. So this plugin logic is very straightforward, simple. So I'm going to build it, but before building that we have to sign in our assembly, right? That is why already I have signed in my assembly here. And with this sign in, then only I will be able to register it. So this is my .NET framework version I'm using it, and this is my namespace name. So once everything is correct, I will rebuild the solution. I go to the output. Once the build is completed, then I will be having the DLL file, and I will be registering the DLL file to the plugin registration tool. Its current build is running. Okay, so build has been succeeded. So this is the DLL file created for my repository. So I'll copy this name, DLL file, and I want to I have to register this DLL into the plugin registration tool. So for that I will go to the register and register new assembly from here. It's taking time to respond again. Okay, so here under register, and I'll use the register new assembly. I'll browse my path. So this is the assembly I have created, and this is the plugin for me. And I'll keep this setting as default and register this plugin. So now once this is registered, so you can some
API which we have created. So currently you can see we can register these steps from here. If we expand this our custom API, there is a little icon to expand it. So when you expand, there you will see the plugin if it is any if it has any plugin registered there. So currently, I think it is not there because we have not yet registered, but we can use this plugin registration tool itself to register the steps plugin as a step there. So you can see there is entity and none, and there is no plugin register here. We can add from here. We can add the register the steps from plugin from here, but also we can register the plugin from the interface. So if you go to the our dynamics here, and if we search the plugin type here, and if you search the DNLB, that plugin which we have just now we have registered, we can see it. Before that it will not be available. So now this plugin we have registered for this API, and it is done. So once we have saved it, and if we refresh this, if you try to reload this again, it will take time. But when you reload it, then you can see your plugin will be coming here after reloading. So we can see from here, and you can register the plugin from here also. So both way it is feasible. So once it is registered, I can test it. So now to test this API, I'm going to use the Power Automate flow, because this is kind of API call we are going to make, and then this will be the our unbound call, because we have not given the binding type any entity. So this will be our in unbound action, and under the unbound action I should be able to see my this API. To see that, I will be going to the my flows, going to create the new flow, and I will take this as a on demand flow here. DNLB test account, this is the manual trigger. So okay, so in my Power Automate flow site, where I have connected to my environment here, the my .NET environment, so where I'm going to create this thing. So I have selected that one, then this trigger my flows is here. So I'm going to select the unbound action of the Dataverse. So under Dataverse connector, I will have the unbound actions, and here I will see if my names are there, my the API names. So it is start with DNLB, so we'll go for, yeah, DNLB. I think I have to refresh this is old one, let me refresh this. Okay, so next step I'm going to add data was connected, unbound, perform unbound action. Here I will be getting my account name custom API listed here, because that is the unbound kind of action or operation. So here if I search, yeah, DNLB, you can see the account name is available now. So I have selected it. As soon as you will select, you will see the input parameters what we have taken. It will ask us to set it here, but before that I'm just going to add the input parameter as a name here. So this is the account name.
account name, and then the parent account id, parent account id. So two parameter I have taken it from the my manual trigger. I'm going to set it here, account name and account id. Okay, it is done. I will save it. To test it, I need to pass the account name and account id, and we can create it. So but before I perform the test, I need to know my the account id which I'm going to pass it here. So for that one, I think already I have opened one of the account here. This is the account id. I'm going to set it on the parameter. So performing the test manually on this my Power Automate flow to test my custom API, I'm going to pass this account ID name, and then the name of this one will be DNLB custom API test. Okay, let's run it. So flow has run successfully. If we see the flow status from here, run history, on the unbound action control, we can see the response coming from the our API. It's created, the perform operation has been performed. So if I'll go to the my accounts, account list, there is a mistake. The account has not been created yet. So we will try to update this assembly. Maybe the we have not mapped the parameters correctly. Okay, so it has not yet created, but it has run successfully. And why it is not created? Because I can see from here that the response is not set. So I'll see my code again here back, and in the create account plugin code, I have the this is the wrong one. You can see the API which we are calling, this name is different because I didn't notice that. So I need to update my assembly. Because of that, this check was not passed, and then the logic of create didn't happen. So for that one, I'm going to take this name of this my API. This is the API name, DNLB account name. Put the name here, because there is a check that if the account name, if the API name is TNLB underscore account name, then only this will perform the create. So I'll rebuild my solution. Okay, build succeeded. I'm going to update the assembly here. So to update assembly, I have to change my view from the message to the display by assembly because I want to see my assembly name here. So I'm listing the assembly first, and this is my assembly which I have. So I'll update it. So I'll select the update, browse my assembly, select it and update it. So it is updated.
Try to resubmit it for the same request.
This time we will check if this having the response coming inside that. Now you can see the response is coming. So response is having the GUID of the record created, and now if you see in the dynamics with the DNLB, this record is created. So like that you can create the custom API and you can test them, but this is a very simple example. But in a real time when you implement, you will have a lot of parameters, input parameters, lot of conditions on the input parameter, data manipulations, and then you will be performing different kind of operations on the API. So I hope this video was useful to you, and let me know if any suggestions on this video and anything to be improved. So thank you for watching this video and have a nice day.